Hello, I am Deb Coviello, the Drop-In CEO. And as always, I want to thank you for joining us for another amazing episode where week after week I get to speak to the most amazing leaders who share their insights with you. And just know I do this because I sincerely care about the C-suite leader to help them navigate challenges and opportunities with confidence with the experts that I bring on the show. And this week, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Kerim Kfuri, who epitomizes the essence of a modern day Renaissance man. And as the dynamic president and CEO of the Atlas Network, Kareem spearheads a global innovative revolutionizing the supply chain industry. And he has a strong commitment to excellence. And we're going to also get into him being he has launched the podcast, the Supply and Demand Show, which is aimed at creating a platform for dialogue amongst those professionals and experts who truly care about the future of supply chain management. Kareem, thank you so much for dropping in.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so before we got on the air, we were chit-chatting about our roots here. He's from New York, I'm from Jersey, so we were swapping a few stories. But I'm honestly very excited to have him and his insights. As you know, I from the manufacturing environment, and I sincerely care about those raw materials coming in and how are we going to get those things logistically to our customers in full and on time. And so it is my pleasure to really dig into his thought leadership and expertise. But I'm going to pass the mic back over to you to share a bit about yourself personally and your career journey.
Thank you so much for having me, really. And what exciting times we're in right now. I mean, supply chain has finally become common vernacular. People and consumers all want to know more and more about how it all works, and business leaders as well. And so, I really appreciate you bringing me on the show and giving me the platform to be able to speak about this. I don't think anybody who just kind of wakes up one day and says they want to be in the realm of supply chain. I think it sort of comes, and I don't think really any entrepreneur, which is what I consider myself to be first and foremost, really has a straight or a direct path. And you have a combination of experiences that come together that then make the secret sauce as to how you're going to be that effective leader or be transformative in a space that you either know about or have interacted with and now want to be a part of. And that was the story for me. From a young age, I'll go way back. I've always been sort of a global citizenship type of mentality. My parents were foreigners, came from Lebanon during the Civil War. So I grew up speaking, three languages in the house, French, Arabic, and English, and was on my first plane probably by like 2 or 3 months old, because, family members were sort of scattered in different parts of the world. And I understood quickly that, that is how to operate. We have people and different languages and cultures, and communication is super important, regardless of the language or cultural differences. And that's played a role for me throughout my life and the things that I do. I think at the same time, too, as a kid, I just had this kind of limitless mindset. We talk about a growth mindset. I had a bit of a limitless mindset that the only real restrictions that we have in this life are the ones that we put on ourselves. Whether you are in a box that people try to put you in or you create for yourself, whether it's because of background or education or whatever it may be, that it's our job to keep breaking through these limitations that we all put on ourselves. And if you reach for the stars, maybe you'll get to the moon, and that's the ideology there. And so, from a young age too, as an entrepreneur, I was always just striving to meet people and develop new, unique business opportunities, whether it was selling blueberries on the side of the street at 6 years old or, making a t-shirt company in the mall. I was an optimist and a entrepreneur from a young age. And then, my life sort of took different turns. I tried different industries. I started in the music industry because I was in music for a long, long time, which is yet another method of communication and the way that people relate to each other through not verbal but music. And did that for a while. Was in the music industry. Graduated from my university, Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and went into the music industry and created a .com when everybody was doing that, back when Amazon actually sold books, if you could believe it, back in 2000. So, 1999, 2000 was, started a .com, got a team, Basically ran that for about a year. It imploded like everybody else did. Went back, was one of those dot-com refugees and got my master's degree in business law and finance in DC at American University. And then did some work in consulting at Accenture. And then I was at the Securities and Exchange Commission in the Office of International Affairs, and then NASD FINRA in the realm of risk mitigation and compliance and regulatory practices. And so this all kind of came together to make a very unique soup of a person who essentially knew cultures, new communication, new consulting, new entrepreneurship, new finance, and kind of had background and experiences to kind of bring it all together. But really, where it came to roost, if you want to say, as far as my experience in global supply chain, was when I traveled to Asia to see some friends and family, and I went to some factories and I saw ideas being made into reality and the scale of manufacturing, mass production basically. But at the same time, understood the risks and challenges that existed where businesses would struggle to essentially have communication with their suppliers throughout the world. When and if things go wrong, because things always go wrong in global supply chain and manufacturing,
Yes.
very little communication, transparency, visibility, and
Mhm.
recourse when things happen. And this for me was the creation of a business. This is basically what this was. It was the creation of a business because how could we basically be able to create an opportunity to safeguard individuals and businesses against these pitfalls and challenges that existed while
Yes.
still taking advantage of the global economy? And that was the beginning of the Atlas Network, which I started more than 20 years ago. That's why the logo is Atlas carrying the globe, because that's the weight of those problems and issues and challenges that we put on our shoulders to allow businesses to grow and thrive and so forth. And, that was the beginnings of it. And now we are 2,000 suppliers. We are the first US-based verified supplier of Alibaba. I am an ambassador of Alibaba. And I do a significant amount of not just work in commodities, textiles, and innovation products for our thousands of clients and millions of products, but outside of that, speak a lot about protocols, best practices, and the realm of supply chain, especially post the pandemic and in our current environment where it's on the news every single day. So that's a bit about me. That's a background. Hopefully, it wasn't too long and a little
No.
convoluted, but I think that that's kind of again, the special sauce that makes me me and my perspectives.
Yeah, there's so much I want to go. And for those watching on the YouTube channel, copious notes, even though we're recording this, because, I want to go into your early childhood and your humble beginnings, but I want to
Sure.
go actually what's current on my mind because I'm in manufacturing. I deal with a lot of CEOs and small and mid-sized companies, manufacturing companies. I want you to be very prescriptive, Atlas. What do you do? How do you serve? What problems do you solve?
Sure. So the Atlas Network is basically an end-to-end supply chain management and solutions company. And that means a lot of things.
Yeah.
Essentially, we connect with small to mid-sized businesses, entrepreneurs, as well as large-scale businesses that have supply chain challenges. And that challenge could be finding the right supplier, doing the prototyping,
Oh my
overseeing the
God.
manufacturing process, the quality control components, the logistical setup and shipping and distribution, customs clearance, warehouse delivery. And this could be for either companies that don't have the bandwidth to do it themselves. They can't open an office overseas. They don't know how to pick the right supplier, have eyes and ears on the ground, and have third-party attestation. Or for very large-scale organizations that don't want to commit resources to a new SKU or to a new product release, and they want to kind of outsource that part of the business. So it really depends upon where and at what part in the life cycle a company comes to us. But all of the time, it's with some level of a problem or a challenge that they're looking for a solution for that they internally can't solve for or don't want to. And that's how we plug in. So it is a little bit kind of industry agnostic and even directionally agnostic, but through those 20 plus years, it's involved consulting, babysitting, supervision, really the end-to-end part of the entire
Very
supply
cool.
chain, which has so many moving parts.
So, one last question because my wheels are going inside my head of who do I want to introduce you to or
Sure,
how I
sure.
might use your services. But when we think about you being industry agnostic, are though there's some sweet spots that you
Yes.
do play in?
Yes. Yes, there are. We have done a significant amount in the consumer packaged goods space, and more specifically in the spirits and beverage industry, where we have over 450 spirits and beverage clients. We manufacture millions of bottles and closures and shippers and all the accoutrements and paraphernalia that go along with that for spirits, beverage, and food industry. So we've done a lot in that space. We've also done a lot in apparel. We've done a significant amount in luxury goods and then sort of unique innovation products to market, things that have never really been done before that start as ideas on a napkin, 3D printing, unique prototyping and molding capabilities, and really that sort of bringing ideas to reality side. So, there are some sweet spots and there's pretty much there isn't anything we haven't really touched from robotics to baby products. But we
So
do kind of
interesting.
play in particular areas.
Very, very interesting. Because again, I know somebody that works with small companies that try to do that import, but they just don't know how to do that, all the paperwork
Yeah,
associated with it. So they provide that service. I myself am working with a small and medium-sized business. There is a particular flour that I have strong concerns with, and I believe I know the alternate sources of supply. I'm trying to get them to switch, but you might have some knowledge.
sure,
So
sure.
you and I are going to continue to talk after this conversation. This is the
Happy
value
to,
of
happy to.
podcasting. We get to network and find each other's value. So I'm just going to share a bit. When you talk about who you were as a youth, everything is limitless. I used to sell things, lemonade stands, arts and craft. I was an entrepreneur. I was a creative. And the interesting thing is, I listened to your career path and move. You bounced around to different things that made sense at the time, leveraging your technical capability, curiosity, etc. I did the same thing, but I think I lost myself in the process. And then, fast forward 6 years ago, entrepreneurship came to me. It is
Hmm.
still a journey, but I came back to my creative roots of limitlessness. And it's unfortunate that sometimes we allow ourselves to allow narratives or society to limit us. And worst case, we adopt those limitations. And I really,
Yes.
really love the point that you put out is having that limitless mindset about who we are and our value.
And I think that to that point, Deb, one part of that is because we forego we forego the challenges for the conveniences. We basically are in this age of convenience culture. We push some buttons and miracles happen. And we're trying to play this game where keeping our mind at rest as much as possible is like somehow deemed success. But the reality of it is that we've always been adventurers. We've always been looking for new mountains to conquer and new kind of challenges to overcome. And somehow along the lines, we use like technology and other aspects as ways to downplay our abilities. And I talk a lot about this when it is regards to AI, where I discuss, how much do we gain through AI, amazing technological marvels and capabilities, but what do we lose? What are we losing in the process? The ability to have the creative thought process potentially, the ability to have the next Shakespeare because our kids today use it to write their papers, or even different industries are using it in ways that make a process where the true exploration happens during the process shortcut. Yes, of course, there are certain places where we want to accelerate the process. Like I think, for example, medical research, amazing. We're going to see things where it would take human beings 10 or 20 years to get to a place where we can get to by sequencing things and certain permutations that human beings could never do at lightning speed. And we can save lives and change things, directives. There's so many aspects in manufacturing that are unbelievable too, but it's a double-edged sword when it comes to some levels of technology because it can also limit our abilities too. And it's just about temperance. It's about how and when and where and right placement. So, we're only confined by what we allow to confine us. And whether that's technology or whatever it may be, we have to be cognizant of this and continue to try to break through boundaries, our personal ones, societal ones, whatever they may be. We got to keep pushing forward.
I've had a lot of people ask me about the use of AI and is it going to replace people in their jobs and everything. And I would love to go there. Um, yes, it could replace some people, but what I think it is, it frees us up to be able to do more creative pursuits or move laterally or learn new skills. I myself will use AI as an efficiency tool, but I know that when I maybe use it for communicating a procedure or thought leadership, I will always review it and maybe it helps me with the curation process a little bit quicker. But people want to hear from me and my voice. So I will always put a creative spin where I feel that potentially society, and we're going to get off of this and get back to supply chain real
Yeah, yeah,
quick,
yeah.
is that there's such pressure on students in the education system of being right
That's
and
it.
being right. And it
Right.
squelches the creativity. So let's
See,
see AI. Yeah.
you and I know a different way that
Yes.
they don't know. And so for them, for these younger generations,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
challenge is the loss of creativity and so forth to forego the challenge to try to get to those answers quicker and
Yes.
faster and so forth. And in doing so, losing yourself. I mean, I have scenarios where I've seen students, they're looking at a math problem and they take a picture of it and it tells them how to answer it. In that situation, you completely lost the whole point of struggling through it and trying to
Thinking.
figure out why mechanically this works and that works so on, so that when the numbers change a little bit, it's transferable because you understand the concepts rather than the solutions all the time. And that's where I find the real challenge. And those groups, those are the next level generations that are going to really be using it more and more and more. So what have they lost in the process for what they've sort of foregone? They don't have the know-how or the perspective that you have, that I have to say, I use it as a tool, but then it's me doing it. That for them, the tool and them are one and the same. And this
Mm.
is where the breakdowns happen. So anyway, that's a side
All
note, but
right.
a good one.
All right. Well, again, we're going to lead the charge and make sure this younger generation not
There
only
you
we
go.
leverage their skills because they're smarter than us in some cases, but also understand the legacy and what still works. We need to be
Of
able to
course,
think for
of
ourselves
course.
and critical thinking. So, you often like to talk about logistics, and I also love your social media. I want to pick up on one of the things that you recently posted on a trip to Greece, and you talked about the effective logistics they have in people transportation. Share a little bit about that. I think it was quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes to global supply chain and logistics, we often think about it in terms of these very sort of non-human ways
Mhm.
that just essentially are getting widgets from one place to another place and so forth. But the reality of it is that supply chain touches our lives in so many different ways. And I try to
Mm.
discuss this often. So while I was traveling in Greece, I thought it would be worthwhile to discuss sort of supply chain of, tourism and how this works, and whether that's bringing products to some of these more remote islands in Greece that I was looking at so that tourists can enjoy the things that they need that aren't always readily available in those places, or getting people to these islands as another mechanism and component. And while I was in Greece, the way that they do this are by these super high speed, sort of like water ferry taxis that are sea
Mhm.
jets. They're unbelievable. You get on them, it's like a big floating restaurant that goes probably 200 miles per hour in the water and just transports people between these islands all day long. And it was really, really fascinating where you as a tourist can have an amazing experience because of this logistical marvel. You come up to this port and every 15 minutes one of these sea taxis shows up that looks like a big yacht, and you get on there and you transport from one island to the next and next, and they're just doing it all day long. And people will do that, and they'll go from Mykonos, Naxos to Milos and so on and so forth all around. So much so that when we went to the first island, we flew there by plane from Athens to, I think it was, Naxos. And it actually ended up taking longer than if we would have just jumped on the sea jet and took that over. So it's actually, in some ways, an even more efficient process, boat versus air, in some of these places. But all around while I was there in Greece, I was seeing different areas of like agricultural supply chain. I was looking at the way that they do their farming and so forth. Like in some of these islands, they only have so much milk to produce so much local cheese. And then after a certain period of time in the season, everybody who's having the cheese from that island is actually not even from the island anymore. It's like imported because they have supply and demand and only so much
Mhm.
to be able to accommodate the needs of those tourists. So it's just even
Right.
something as simple as like the domestic products that you see and look at it through a lens of sort of supply chain and logistics and supply and demand and mechanics like that. So
So valuable. I mean, even on vacation, you're looking at things from the lens of supply chain. But again, that's what we do when we're in our zone of genius. We just have a particular view of the world. So what I want to do is go into, the biggest story right now is about tariffs. And I know there's a lot of people that understand the impact, they're feeling the impact. But for those of us out there, I'd love for you to maybe just distill it down into what then does this mean on a grander scale from a supply chain perspective? What should we be concerned of? What should we not really be afraid of? And anything that, you can maybe educate people when it comes to maybe things that business owners can consider. But part two, I'll come back to it, is what's the next front of supply chain issues should we be thinking about, even when the risk is not in front of us, but it probably lurking? So give us a quick lesson on the tariff situation.
sure, absolutely. I mean, I talk a lot about this, and I've actually been down on the New York Stock Exchange 4 times in the last 6 weeks discussing
Wow.
this.
Amazing.
So it's a very and for me being from the finance space, that's like a dream come true to be on the New York Stock Exchange talking about these things.
Yes.
But what can I tell you? Tariffs are a have been historically an effective way to generate revenue and to curb the behavior between nations. And why are they being used today? We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit, and the current administration is trying to curb behavior and try to kind of flex particular muscles and influence in the global economy. And so they're putting these tariffs in place. They've collected almost $108 billion so far in tariffs, so much so that, there've been discussions around actually even giving tariff rebate checks back to the American people, up to $600 per person, four-person household, like $2,400 and things of that nature. But the reality of it is that who is truly paying for these costs? And in the end, supply chain is all about consumers. Without the consumer at the tail end of the supply chain, there is no economy. There's no buying, there's no selling, there's no supply, there's no demand. It's all about the consumers. So the objective and the goal of all businesses, given this current environment, is to protect the consumer, to basically try to make the consumer's experience as least disruptive as possible from a quality standpoint, from a timeliness standpoint, and from a cost standpoint. So now you've got these tariffs between these very heavily traded nations. And who's in the middle? Who are the players that are going to basically try to make sure that the consumer at the end is not having those impacts so you don't have inflation and recession and all those other things that happen? Well, that's going to be the suppliers, that's going to be the importers, that's going to be the brands, the wholesalers, the distributors, everyone basically upstream up until the time that it gets to a store shelf and someone has to
Yeah.
buy something. So when it comes to these tariffs, there are 5 ways that I talk about on how to sort of manage, navigate this. And it really depends product by product, industry by industry on what will or won't make sense. I'll go through them quick.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
the first one is absorption. You've got a tariff, somebody's got to pay for it, and you hope that it's not going to be the consumer downstream so they don't leave you or pivot or, just stop buying entirely, which would be bad for the economy and everybody. So from the absorption standpoint, this is all negotiation. Is it going to be partially absorbed by the supplier, a certain part of it, by the importer, by the brand itself, the distributor, and so on? Ultimately, you really want to have a scenario where you try to have as much absorption equally positioned across the different components of the chain and negotiated so you don't lose the customer. Yes, each one of those entities has a lesser amount of profitability, but your hope is that if you stick with them in the tough times and keep the consumer happy, the market continues to grow. And although
Yeah.
you have less profitability on a transaction by transaction, you have an upward trend of sales and profitability in the market. So this is a first ideology around sort of absorption and equally distributed absorption of tariffs so that consumers don't end up paying for it and then leaving you. The second area is deferral of tariffs. So this is sort of a wait and see game. It's a scenario where essentially you are trying to wait to ship out products. You are trying to maybe bring them into places like free trade zones where essentially there may not be tariffs incurred until you pull the goods out of a warehouse
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
And it's really about sort of management of your tariffs and your inventory and playing with your customers on when they need things, when they don't need things, and navigating sort of sales and revenue against when to incur these tariffs. But it's not like you're getting an upfront big hit that then has to be absorbed by a company and then they have to figure out what to do with it. So it's a bit of time management. The third area is terms and conditions. And I think that this is very, very important because this is where businesses go back to their suppliers or wholesalers go back to the brands and so on and negotiate how you're going to kind of kick the can down the road. Kick it's cash flow management. So what you do in this occasion is you say, okay, we usually have payment terms between us where I give you, a certain percentage up front and then another percentage and another percentage, and then we're paid out in full. Well, what we're going to do is that because the tariff impacts are pretty high, how about I pay you the first deposit and maybe I pay you part of the second deposit, but then we sort of lag out the third deposit or fourth deposit so that I can take on the tariff, sell in the market. We have contracts between us that protects us, sell in the market against lesser cost infrastructure, generate those sales, and then pay you back in, let's say, net 90 or net 120 or whatever it may be. Why is
Very
it
interesting.
beneficial? It's beneficial
Wow.
because the supplier ends up keeping the customers that are downstream instead of saying, okay, we don't want to do business anymore, which was happening early on.
Yeah.
And the brand continues to maintain the customer and save them, keep them in the loop. And everybody continues to still do business. It's just a matter of doing things sort of in arrears. So everything is sort of pushed a quarter or pushed 2 quarters to take on the tariffs that you have to take on in this one and that one. It's cash flow management. So that's the third. The fourth
Cool.
one is around price and cost re-engineering. So in my opinion, it's in these scenarios of chaos that you have true opportunity. So perfect example is you say, okay, here's a product. We've always made it with material X. Now material X is 5 times more expensive. Let's go to the drawing board and figure out how we make product with material Y. Material Y costs 5 times less, but is more beneficial in the fact that it's more lightweight or it's more durable or it's whatever it may be. In doing so, you offset the increased cost of the tariffs. You create a product which is similar or even better, potentially. You increase your profitability and you tout hidden benefits or new benefits as re-releases or unique entrants to markets for your clients and your customers. And
Amazing.
so this is the idea of kind of price engineering or cost re-engineering of your products to essentially offset this idea of more exacerbated global economy costs. The final and last one is, which I always leave for the last one, is alternative supply chains because it is a challenge to up and move your entire operation. You also don't know how long the runway is for you to kind of get up and going in this new place. And what I've seen time and time again, especially in this current environment, is a group goes to try to move everything that they have that's dependable and resilient and robust and so forth to save a dollar and cause $5 in headaches. Or even
Mm,
go out of business because of the fact that the new supply chain just can't keep up with the materials, the output, the resources, the technology, and then again, finally, the cost infrastructure just doesn't even make sense anymore. And so these are the 5 ways that I've been discussing sort of navigating tariffs. And as I mentioned, every industry, every product is a little different, where some may make sense and some is relationship driven and some is cost structural driven and so on. But these are the ways you really have to look at it as a business to see where you're going to have the best equation that's going to allow you to still kind of work and so forth. And some of them is a blend to say, we're going to kind of keep doing things over here. We're going to keep exploring other options over there. And we're going to try to figure out a way to navigate, these times because we don't know how long these times are going to last. Every couple
yeah.
of months it changes.
Well, I mean, that's going to lead into the next question. And this is absolutely fascinating because I was aware of some of this, but the way you distill the messages was just so I could digest and really understand the challenge and expertise that we depend on of those supply chain experts in trying to make us keep the economy viable. Amidst this change. So, again, this is the hot topic of the day right now. There is always a crisis. There is a pandemic. There is a change in leadership. There is this, that, and the other thing. And then there are leaders and organizations that throw the dice and say, well, that's not going to happen to me, or that'll never happen. And then those are the ones that don't survive these economic or whatever Mother Nature changes. So, if you had advice for leaders, what would you be telling them to start looking at with respect to supply chain to mitigate any potential risks, even if it seems unlikely? What are your thoughts?
I love that you, that's a great question.
Because I'm always hammering in. People throw the dice and say, well, when the planets line up in 2 million years from now, then I'll worry about it. And then they're the ones in the front page of the news. Again, I am in quality. I've had to deal with food recalls. When you throw the dice, guess what happens?
Yeah.
Off my platform. What say you?
Yes, no, absolutely. What I would tell you is that the only way to be disruption proof is to be agile and nimble and willing and being able to pivot and playing through the worst case scenarios. You need to look at your existing supply chain, no matter how good it is, and say, if we don't get this X product for the next 6 months, what happens? How do we deal with it? What is our contingency plans? And, in the world of law enforcement, they do this all the time with regards to either terrorist scenarios or hostage situations where they play out these doomsday situations. How is, New York going to survive this or that or the other, whatever it may be. And that's exactly what has to happen in global supply chain. You have to play through these scenarios to say, do we have all of our eggs in one basket? What happens if supplier X just decides to just, has a fire? What do we do? And that was perfectly seen with regards to, like, let's see, do you remember when there was the semiconductor issue a few months, a year ago, I think it was, where one of the biggest semiconductor manufacturers essentially went out of business or had a big fire. It impacted the entire automotive industry. No one could get cars because all of them operated on computers that needed those semiconductors and chips inside of them. So, with that in mind, it's very interconnected and a real challenge. So, I think the point being is that supply chain is always going to have its ups and downs. I wrote a book called Supply Chain Ups and Downs, literally, which talks about the roller coaster ride that it is, the controllable factors and the uncontrollable factors. And the only thing that allows you to be sort of, again, disruption proof is your ability to navigate the seen and the unforeseen and to play through those worst case scenarios as it may relate to your business and how you're going to deal with it. Could you deal with it? Very
So,
important.
if a leader just doesn't have that capability inside, is that something that you can do with them
Sure.
to stress test their supply chain
Yes,
system? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. It's all about we do supply chain consulting over here at the Atlas Network. We connect in with leaders and with businesses to go through that sort of role-playing situation. How's your current supply chain set up? What happens if these suppliers go out of business? Do you even know your suppliers? I've had businesses that have been in business for 2 decades that have never even met their suppliers. I find that appalling and scary, doing millions of dollars of business and never even meeting your suppliers in any way or having any idea of how sort of the sausage is made or whatever you want to talk. And in some cases, it's very integral or critical to know those things because you have to make certain guarantee statements. You have to do
Yes.
different kinds of things. How do you do that if you have no idea on how kind of the nuts and the bolts come together? So I do think it's very important to be granular when it comes to supply chain, and to really just know what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, and again, I'm a quality and food safety professional, and as part of our certification of our food safety systems, we need to have HACCP plans, hazard analysis, critical control points, and often our best defense is having a robust understanding of the safety and quality of our suppliers via visiting them or other means. So, yeah, you are singing to the choir here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love this conversation. My brain is going a million miles a minute. Again, this is why we podcast to build relationships with people in our network, because if we can't work together, we may be able to connect yourself with people in my network that could value your expertise. And for anybody listening out there, if you've really valued this conversation, we're going to have all of Kerim's information in the show notes for you to connect with him. I'm already connected with him. And again, he is great on video. So make sure you catch him on all those social networks. But I am going to pass it back to you one last time to share any last closing thoughts with our audience.
Yeah, I mean, from a closing thought, what I would say is that global supply chain is essential to our everyday lives. And it's my focus and my goal to make it as relatable as I can. So, I'll even speak about how Taylor Swift is a supply chain superhero. I'll talk about, why bananas need to show up green at the supermarket and, and how we basically operate through the tourism side or the agricultural side and really try to help people, whether it's consumers, businesses, to understand the importance of the supply chain and how it touches each one of our lives. Um, we are in a complicated and a bit challenging time now, but what is going to get us through is going to be proper communication, cultural respect between nations, and really being able to understand that we operate as a global economy, regardless of us wanting to have our own domestic goals and objectives. The world is what is at stake here. We are interconnected by our relationships, by our technology, our businesses, and so forth. And so, as we operate, we need to have that kind of mentality that the best and most efficient outcomes may come from wherever they may come from and be open to that idea and open to that suggestion. And finally, to be really disruption proof is to understand that you will never have scenarios in global supply chain where the apple cart can't get turned over. And as a matter of fact, if you expect that it can't or things will be status quo, you are only setting yourself up for a scenario inevitably of some kind of a breakdown, some kind of a failure, whether it's small, medium, or large. So you just got to keep your eyes and ears open and be paying attention to the indicators and even those that you don't even see.
This has been an amazing interview. I am so grateful that I was introduced to you, learn from you, and bring your voice and insights to my community. So I just want to say thank you so much for dropping in on the show. You've been an absolutely amazing guest, and I wish you well and continued success.
Thank you so much, Deb. I really appreciate it. Great show. Thank you again.